Hi guys, quick devotion for you today titled I Was There. I'm currently going through a time right now which has been repeatedly termed unprecedented times. And a few people in the media have even made a parallel between what's going on now and World War II. And you can't help but, sort of imagine and wonder what it would have been like to live in a time where people were living on rations, people had to sleep in the underground and send their children off to the countryside to be safe and ultimately have their whole lives turned upside down without their say. Pretty similar to what is going on right now. And also I do wonder about the role of the church back then as well. And I wonder what our role and what our response is currently now. It's very hard, when you're a Christian and you're seen as this positive figure, but ultimately you go through your own sort of hiccups and roller coasters as well. And I've had my own ones. I've sort of gone through this period of time, with a bit of anxiety, a bit of fear. Initially I was ignorant, then I was denying it. Then I found peace in God, and at one stage even casting, judgment on the nation and all sorts of things. And I even settled at one stage as for me and my household, we're safe, we're saved, we're covered. Whatever happens outside, that can stay outside. But ultimately, God doesn't want us to settle in that place. I was reading scripture and I felt led to this particular scripture, and I guess this is the basis of this devotion, and it's in Exodus, particularly around Exodus chapter 8, chapter 9 and 12. I can't go through it on this devotion, but take time to read it. And what we ultimately find out is that while the plights and the troubles the Egyptians were going through was continuing, the children of God, the Israelites, were actually safe in a land called Goshen. And so we're talking about when there was darkness in Egypt, there was actually light in Goshen. Where there were swarms of creatures in Egypt, the Israelites were actually protected. So as a Christian, you take comfort and you're like, yeah, whew, well, that's me, I'm good. But then you read on later on, and this actually caught my eye. This is the scripture where we're going. It's actually Exodus 12:38. And it caught my eye. It's quite inconspicuous, but it made me think. And it actually says in verse 38 of chapter 12, it says, "And a mixed multitude went up also with them, and flocks and herds, even very much cattle." And have to go very quickly here, but long story short is that we find out that actually it wasn't only the Israelites who left the land of Egypt, who escaped the land of Egypt. They ended up taking a bunch of other people with them. They could have been, slaves from other nations, and they also could have very probably been Egyptians as well. For whatever reason, whether they were convicted or not convicted, or whether an Israelite went up to them and said, "Listen, come, just come. Our God's got this covered. You don't have to stay in Egypt. You don't have to suffer. Come with us." Ultimately, we know that they were saved. And later on, we find out, a couple of issues down the line. You wonder whether it should have just been in a invite-only Exodus party, but that's what happened. I say all of this to say, basically, throughout history, Christians have actually been at the forefront of a lot of momentous moments in time. And the thing is, history records what happened and who did what, but also God and heaven records what happened and did what and what they did. In this world, we've seen things like Hurricane Katrina, we've seen bushfires in Australia, 9/11, the apartheid, various civil wars in various nations, and many more. And in the Bible, they went through their own unprecedented times as well. We see things like, what I've just said, the exodus of the Israelites in Egypt. We've seen the very close extermination of the Jews in the book of Esther. We saw the armies of God being bullied by a giant and what we do see is that actually in all of these things, a name always arises, a people always arise. Whether it's a Moses, whether it's an Esther, whether it's a David. And really my question is, in this time and this moment now, what is your stand? Where will you stand in years to come when history has been written about what's happening today? Where will you stand? Will you be able to say that you stood with the church, you prayed away this virus? Would you be able to say that actually you were part of the dispensation of people who brought a nation back to God through prayer, through their deeds, or because of the power and the gifting of a church, actually the nations ran to the church for the solution? Or will you say that you stayed at home and hoarded toilet roll? If it was possible today that some of the people who lived around the time of the Holocaust were around, I'm sure they would say something like, "I'm ashamed that it happened in my time." You know, if Christians who lived during the civil rights movement, you know, and we know about of the help of the churches were around, I'm sure they would say, you know what, I'm proud. I'm so proud. I'm so proud that we were part of that movement, that moment. As Christians living in our own unprecedented times, we cannot afford to sit back and fold our hands with the rest of the world and wait to find out what will happen. You know, we need to be at the front line. We talk about the front line and the great work that NHS is doing and many other people who serve currently right now. But ultimately, us Christians, we're also meant to be at the front line with our prayer, with our reaching out, with our encouraging, with our sharing. We're meant to allow the mixed multitude to follow us also. We might be in Goshen, but that doesn't mean that the plight of the world is not our concern. So I just want to ask you, since this has unfolded, how many people have you reached out to? Not your friends and your family. How many people have you shared, surprised with your generosity? How many times have you prayed? How many times have you prayed with the body? If you're part of Flow Rivers, how many prayer calls have you joined in on? Ultimately, I just want to ask you, at the end of all of this, when history's been written in years to come about this moment, one day in the future, will they remember the church? And will you be able to put your hand up and say, yes, I was part of that? Thank you.